They say a marriage begins to crumble long before the final collapse. The signs are always there, subtle and insidious, but we blind ourselves to them because we want to believe in the dream. That's what I told myself every time Sophie's accusations started. "Mark, who was that woman you were texting?" she demanded one Friday evening, waving my phone in the air like it was Exhibit A. I barely looked up from my fishing gear. That was Beth from HR. She was reminding me about the company retreat. "Oh, sure," she shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "And I'm supposed to believe that's all it was?" I took a deep breath, resisting the urge to snap. "Yes, Sophie. That's all it was." This had become our routine, me preparing for a weekend on the lake with my buddies while Sophie grilled me about every interaction I'd had with the opposite sex. She was relentless, picking fights over imagined scenarios, questioning my fidelity without a shred of evidence. At first, I thought it was just insecurity. After all, we'd been together for almost 10 years, and marriage has its rough patches. But as the weeks turned into months, her behavior began to gnaw at me in a way I couldn't ignore. It wasn't always like this. When Sophie and I first met, she was vibrant and carefree, the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laugh. I fell for her hard, convinced I'd found my soulmate. Our early years were filled with road trips, lazy Sunday mornings, and dreams of growing old together. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The first cracks appeared when my father passed away 3 years ago. Losing him felt like losing a part of myself, and I threw myself into work and hobbies to cope. Fishing became my escape, my sanctuary. Sophie said she understood, but her actions told a different story. She started complaining that I was distant, accusing me of prioritizing my friends over her. I tried to make time for us, date nights, weekend getaways, but nothing seemed to satisfy her. Then the accusations started. At first, they were minor, offhand comments about how I smiled too much at the waitress or spent too long talking to a female coworker. But over time, they escalated. Sophie became convinced I was having an affair, even though I'd never given her any reason to doubt me. "You're hiding something," she said one night, her eyes narrowing as she watched me type an email. "I can feel it." "Sophie, for the last time, there's nothing to hide," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "I'm just trying to finish this report." "Right," she scoffed. "Because reports are more important than your wife." I didn't know how to respond. Every attempt to reassure her only seemed to deepen her suspicions. It was exhausting, and for the first time in our marriage, I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. The breaking point came one Saturday morning when I returned from a quick errand to find Sophie in a full-blown rage. "Where were you?" she demanded, her hands on her hips. "I told you, I went to pick up bait," I said, holding up the plastic container as proof. "Really?" Her eyes were wild, her voice trembling with anger. "Or were you off meeting some woman?" I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about? You know I'd never do that." "Don't lie to me, Mark," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I saw the way you looked at that cashier last week. Don't think I didn't notice." My frustration boiled over. "For the love of God, Sophie, not every woman I speak to is part of some grand conspiracy to cheat on you. You're paranoid." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I'd gone too far. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Paranoid?" she hissed, tears streaming down her face. "You're the one who's never here. You're the one who disappears every weekend. How do I know what you're really doing out there?" The fight spiraled out of control, leaving both of us emotionally drained. By the time I left for my fishing trip, I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. That weekend, as I sat on the boat with Jeff and the others, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sophie's accusations had reached a fever pitch, and no amount of logic or reassurance seemed to calm her. Jeff, ever the straight shooter, noticed my unease. "You okay, man?" he asked, casting his line into the water. "Yeah," I lied, staring at the rippling surface. "Just. Sophie's been acting weird lately." Jeff raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" "Jealous," I admitted. "Like, accusing me of cheating." "Jealous. She thinks every woman I talk to is a threat." He let out a low whistle. "That's rough. You think it's just insecurity?" "I don't know," I said, shaking my head. "It's like she's trying to pick a fight. I can't figure it out." Jeff was quiet for a moment, reeling in his line. Sometimes, he said carefully, when someone's accusing you of something, it's because they're trying to distract you from something they're doing. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to dismiss them, to chalk it up to Jeff's cynicism, but a small voice in the back of my mind wouldn't let me. What if Sophie's jealousy wasn't about me at all? What if it was about her? The thought lingered as we packed up to head home on Sunday afternoon. Normally, I stayed out until the evening, but something compelled me to leave early. I told the guys I wasn't feeling well, packed my gear, and headed back, my mind racing with possibilities. When I pulled into the driveway, Sophie's car was there. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual were the 2 pairs of unfamiliar men's shoes sitting neatly by the front door. My stomach dropped. I stood there for a moment, staring at the shoes, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. Then, with a surge of adrenaline, I stepped inside. The house was eerily quiet. I set my bag down and moved through the rooms, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't until I reached the bedroom that I heard it, the sound of muffled voices and laughter. I pushed the door open without hesitation, my mind bracing for the worst. There they were, Sophie and 2 men I didn't recognize, sitting on my bed, watching a movie as if nothing was out of the ordinary. For a moment, none of us moved. Sophie's smile froze on her face, and the 2 men exchanged uneasy glances. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears. "Mark," Sophie said finally, her voice trembling. "You're back early." I crossed my arms, my gaze burning into hers. "Yeah. I guess I am." The stage was set. The lies, the excuses, the false accusations, they were all about to unravel. And I was ready to confront the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The silence stretched as we stood frozen in the bedroom. Sophie's smile faded entirely, replaced by an expression of dawning panic. The 2 men, middle-aged, smug, and utterly at ease until now, sat up straighter, their gazes darting between me and the door as if calculating their escape routes. "Mark," Sophie began, her voice shaky. "This isn't what it looks like." Those words. The cliché of every busted cheater. It lit a fire in my chest, and the last thread of my self-control snapped. "Not what it looks like," I bellowed, my voice shaking the walls. "You've got 2 strangers in my bedroom, on my bed, in my house, and you want to tell me this isn't what it looks like?" The bearded man, the bolder of the 2, stood, raising his hands as if trying to calm me. "Look, man, we don't want any trouble." That was all I needed. My fists clenched, and I lunged for him. Before he could react, my fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling back onto the bed. The other man jumped up, his chair clattering to the floor, but I was already moving, adrenaline propelling me forward like a freight train. "You think you can come into my house and disrespect me?" I roared, grabbing the wiry one by his shirt. He struggled, his feet slipping on the hardwood as I slammed him against the dresser. "Mark, stop!" Sophie screamed, but her voice was distant, drowned out by the pounding of my heart and the fire in my veins. The bearded man scrambled to his feet, his hand pressed to his jaw where I'd hit him. "Hey! We didn't know," he stammered, but I cut him off with another swing. He ducked just in time, tripping over the edge of the bed and landing on the floor. The wiry one shoved me, trying to break free, but I tightened my grip and shoved him back, his glasses flying off his face and clattering to the ground. "You mess with another man's wife," I snarled, my voice low and dangerous, "and you think there won't be consequences." The bearded man took his chance, grabbing his friend by the arm and dragging him toward the door. I followed, my steps heavy with rage. They fumbled in their hurry, stumbling over furniture as they bolted down the hall. "Get out of my house!" I shouted, my voice reverberating through the walls. They didn't need to be told twice. They burst through the front door, leaving it swinging open behind them as they disappeared into the night, their shoes still sitting neatly by the entrance like forgotten artifacts of their shame. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard, the adrenaline slowly draining from my body. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Sophie's soft, hiccuping sobs. I turned to face her, and the sight of her sitting on the bed, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking, did nothing to soften my fury. "Get up," I said, my voice cold and sharp. She flinched but didn't move. "Mark, please, just let me explain." "Explain?" I snapped. "You've had months to explain, Sophie. Months of accusing me of cheating, of tearing me down, all while you were sneaking around behind my back. I don't want your excuses. I want you out. Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face twisted in disbelief. Out. Mark, this is our home. No, Sophie, I interrupted, my voice rising. This is my home. I pay the mortgage, I built this life, and you just tore it apart. Pack your things and get out. She shook her head, rising to her feet. You can't mean that. We've been together for 10 years. You're just angry. Angry? I repeated, laughing bitterly. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. I trusted you, Sophie. I loved you. And this is how you repay me. By turning our home into a den for your side pieces. It wasn't like that, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I was lonely, Mark. You were always gone. Don't you dare put this on me, I cut in, my voice shaking with fury. I go fishing for 2 days a month. That's your excuse. While I was out there clearing my head, you were in here desecrating everything we built together. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. The weight of her betrayal crushed any sympathy I might have felt. I crossed my arms, my stance unyielding. You have an hour, I said. Pack your bags and get out. I'll be filing for divorce first thing in the morning. Her eyes widened, her hands trembling as she reached for me. Mark, please. Don't do this. I made a mistake. I stepped back, out of her reach. You made your choices, Sophie. Now you get to live with them. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at me, as if hoping I would change my mind. But when she saw the steely determination in my eyes, she gave up. With a broken sob, she turned and began gathering her things, her movements slow and mechanical. I watched as she moved through the house, stuffing clothes and belongings into a suitcase. The woman I had once loved was now a stranger, her betrayal etched into every line of her face. When she was done, she stood by the door, her suitcase in one hand, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Mark, she said softly, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I simply stepped aside, opening the door wider, and waited for her to leave. She hesitated, as if hoping for some sign of forgiveness, but when none came, she stepped outside, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I closed the door behind her, locking it for good measure. As I stood alone in the quiet house, the gravity of what had just happened began to sink in. I had lost the woman I thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But more than that, I had lost the illusion of the life we'd built together. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined for our story, but it was the truth. And for the first time in months, I felt free. The next morning dawned gray and overcast, matching the heaviness in my chest. I had barely slept after throwing Sophie out, the events of the previous night playing on an endless loop in my mind. Every detail, the sight of her on our bed with those men, her feeble excuses, the look on her face as she walked out the door, gnawed at me. But amidst the turmoil, one thing was clear, there was no going back. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, the bitterness a fitting match for my mood. A stack of paperwork sat in front of me, freshly printed from the attorney's office I'd called at dawn. Filing for divorce felt surreal. For years, I had imagined Sophie and I growing old together, watching our daughters thrive, and someday spoiling grandchildren. Now, all of that was ashes. The legal process began that morning. My attorney, Sandra, was efficient and direct, her professionalism a cold comfort. She didn't ask for details beyond what was necessary. I appreciated that. Sophie won't contest this, I said, sliding over the signed papers. She knows she doesn't have a leg to stand on. Sandra nodded, scanning the documents. Given the evidence you've shared, I don't see how she could. You're entitled to the house and likely full custody of your assets. Infidelity is a tough case to defend against. Good, I said firmly. I want this done as quickly and cleanly as possible. She gave me a look, not unkind. It's never as clean as you want it to be, Mark. But I'll make sure you get through this. As I left her office, the weight of what I was doing settled over me. There was no turning back now. Sophie was no longer the woman I'd pledged my life to. She was simply someone I used to know. The harder part came later that day. Telling our daughters, Lily and Sarah, was something I had dreaded since the moment I decided to end the marriage. They were both grown now, living in different states and carving out their own paths in the world. But no amount of distance or independence could soften the blow of learning that the family they grew up in was crumbling. I called Lily first. At 26, she was the more grounded of the two, her no-nonsense attitude a mirror of my own. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful. Dad. Hey, what's up? Her warmth made my throat tighten. I cleared it, trying to find the words. Hey, Lil. Listen, I need to talk to you about something. It's serious. Her tone shifted immediately, her cheerfulness replaced by concern. What's wrong? Is everything okay? No, I admitted, sinking into the couch. It's about your mom. There was a pause. What happened? I told her everything. I spared no detail, recounting Sophie's behavior over the past few months, the lies, the accusations, and finally, what I had walked in on the night before. Lily didn't interrupt. She listened quietly, her silence more unnerving than any outburst could have been. When I finished, the line remained silent for a moment before she spoke, her voice tight with emotion. I can't believe this. Mom, did that? Yes, I said softly. She did. Are you okay? She asked, her voice trembling. I'll get through it, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. But Lily, I need you to know the truth. I couldn't keep this from you. Her anger flared, sharp and immediate. She doesn't deserve us, Dad. She doesn't deserve you. Don't say that, I said, though part of me agreed. She's still your mother. No, she said firmly. She made her choice. And now I'm making mine. The call with Sarah was harder. At 22, she was more sensitive, more attached to the idea of our family as a unit. She answered with her usual bubbly enthusiasm, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Dad. It's so good to hear from you. Hi, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. I need to talk to you about something important. Her tone grew serious. What is it? Is everything okay? Not really, I said, bracing myself. It's about your mom. As I recounted the story, her reactions mirrored Lily's, shock, disbelief, and then anger. But unlike Lily, she broke down, her sobs filling the line. How could she do this to us? She cried. How could she throw everything away? I don't have an answer for that, Sarah, I said, my heart aching for her. I wish I did. I don't want to talk to her, she said through her tears. I don't even want to see her. Take your time, I said gently. This is hard for all of us. By the end of the day, both girls had called Sophie, their conversations brief and devastating. Later, Sophie texted me, her desperation apparent in every word. Mark, please. They won't speak to me. Can we talk? I can fix this. I stared at the message for a long time, my emotions a tangled mess. Then I typed a single sentence. You should have thought about that before. I hit send and put the phone down, the finality of my words washing over me. That night, the house was eerily quiet. The echoes of Sophie's betrayal lingered, but so did the voices of my daughters, their love and loyalty a balm to my wounded heart. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, I wasn't alone in this. As I sat in the dimly lit living room, my thoughts drifted to the future. It wouldn't be easy, but I would rebuild. For myself. For my daughters. And maybe, someday, for the chance to trust and love again. The days that followed Sophie's betrayal passed in a blur. The house felt hollow without her presence, but the silence was strangely welcome. Still, loneliness crept in during the quiet hours, wrapping itself around me like a heavy fog. The memories of happier times, family dinners, lazy Sunday mornings, laughter shared over silly things, were now bitter echoes, taunting me with what I'd lost. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake in the bed we once shared, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the knowledge that the life we built together was a lie. I tried to focus on work, on the support of my daughters, but the sadness was relentless, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. Amid the darkness, Olivia was my lifeline. We had met a year ago at a local community event. She was warm and vibrant, her laugh infectious, her outlook on life refreshing. At the time, I thought of her as a friend, someone who brought light into a life that was growing dim. Our friendship grew slowly, naturally, and she became someone I could confide in, a confidant, a listener, a voice of reason when my world started to spiral. When Sophie's infidelity came to light, Olivia had been one of the first people I turned to. Her voice on the phone that night was a balm to my soul, calm and steady in a storm of chaos. You didn't deserve this, Mark, she said softly. You're a good man. Sophie's choices have nothing to do with you and everything to do with her. Her words struck a chord. For so long, I had blamed myself for the cracks in my marriage, convincing myself that I wasn't enough. But Olivia saw me differently. She saw my worth when I couldn't. As the weeks passed, Olivia's presence in my life became a source of strength. She checked in on me daily, sending texts to brighten my mornings or dropping by with home-cooked meals when she knew I hadn't eaten properly. Her kindness was unyielding, her support unwavering. One evening, she showed up at my door with a bottle of wine and a movie. You need a distraction, she said, holding up the bag of snacks she'd brought with a smile. And maybe a little bit of fun. We settled on the couch, the movie playing in the background more for noise than entertainment. At some point, I turned to her, overwhelmed by gratitude. Why are you doing this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, her hazel eyes warm and earnest. Because I care about you, Mark. You've been through enough. You don't have to go through it alone. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, I felt the urge to pull away, to retreat back into the shell I'd built around myself. But something in her gaze stopped me, a quiet strength, a refusal to let me drown in my sorrow. The turning point came on a crisp autumn evening. Olivia and I had spent the day hiking in the nearby woods, her idea of helping me clear my head. The air was cool and refreshing, the vibrant colors of fall leaves a stark contrast to the gray cloud that had followed me since Sophie's betrayal. As we reached the summit of the trail, we sat on a fallen log, the view stretching out before us. Olivia handed me a thermos of coffee, her hand brushing mine. The simple touch sent a warmth through me that I hadn't felt in months. You're different when you're here, she said, her voice soft but certain. Lighter. Like you're starting to let go. I stared at the horizon, the fading sun casting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Maybe I am, I admitted. But it's hard. There's so much anger, so much sadness. I don't even know where to begin. She placed her hand over mine, her touch grounding me. You begin by forgiving yourself. You didn't fail, Mark. You gave everything to your marriage. Sophie's choices were hers alone. Her words were like a key, unlocking something inside me. The weight I had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. In the weeks that followed, Olivia and I grew closer. What had started as friendship deepened into something more, a connection that felt both familiar and new. She never pushed, never asked for more than I was ready to give. Instead, she stood by me, a steady presence in the chaos of rebuilding my life. One evening, as we sat on my porch watching the sunset, she turned to me, her expression serious. Mark, she said, her voice steady. I want to be a part of your life. Not just as a friend, but as someone who can help you move forward. I know you've been hurt, and I know it won't be easy. But I'm here. For as long as you'll have me. Her words took my breath away. For so long, I had felt adrift, unsure of where to go or how to heal. But in that moment, looking at Olivia, I saw a path forward, a chance to build something new, something real. I reached for her hand, holding it tightly. I want that too, I said, my voice filled with certainty. I don't know where this will take us, but I want to find out. Together. She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Together, she echoed. That night, as Olivia and I sat in the glow of the fading sun, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Sophie's betrayal had shattered the life I thought I wanted, but it had also opened the door to something I never expected, a chance to start over, to love again, and to find happiness on my own terms. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to hope. And with Olivia by my side, I knew I could face whatever came next. It had been 6 months since I filed for divorce, 6 months of navigating the wreckage of a life I once thought was unshakable. The legal process was as grueling as I'd feared, a constant reminder of the betrayal that had upended everything. But through it all, Olivia had been my rock, her quiet strength steadying me when I felt like crumbling. The final papers came on a Thursday. I remember holding the envelope, staring at my name next to Sophie's for what I knew would be the last time. Our marriage had officially ended, not with the loud, dramatic implosion I'd once feared, but with the quiet scratch of a pen. It felt surreal. That evening, I sat on the porch of the house I now owned alone. The sun dipped low on the horizon, its warm light filtering through the trees. The air carried the faint scent of rain, and for the first time in months, the silence felt peaceful rather than oppressive. Olivia arrived shortly after sunset. She had a way of knowing when I needed her without me saying a word. She stepped onto the porch, her hair swept back in a loose braid, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "Thought you could use these," she said with a smile, holding out the flowers. I took them, my chest tightening with gratitude. "Thank you. They're beautiful." "So," she said, sitting beside me, "how does it feel?" I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs. "Lighter. Sad, but lighter." She nodded, her hand finding mine. "That's how it starts. Piece by piece, you let it go." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the wine untouched as we watched the stars emerge one by one. Being with Olivia was easy, a stark contrast to the turmoil of the past year. She didn't demand anything of me, didn't ask for answers I wasn't ready to give. She just was. And that was enough. A week later, I saw Sophie for the first time since she left. We met at a coffee shop downtown to finalize a few lingering details about the divorce. She looked different, thinner, her once bright eyes clouded with regret. "Mark," she began, her voice hesitant. "I want to say. I'm sorry. For everything." I studied her, the woman I had loved for so many years, and felt a strange mix of anger and pity. "Sorry doesn't fix it, Sophie. But I appreciate you saying it." Her eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted it to end like this." "Neither did I admitted, my voice softer than I intended. "But we're here. And now we move forward." She nodded, wiping at her eyes. "I hope you find happiness. You deserve it." "I already have," I said simply. Life after Sophie was quieter, simpler. My daughters and I grew closer than ever, their unwavering support a reminder that love, real love, endures even in the face of betrayal. Olivia became an integral part of that love, her presence a constant source of comfort and joy. One evening, as we stood in the kitchen making dinner, she turned to me, her eyes serious. "You've been different lately," she said. "Lighter. Happier." I smiled, reaching for her hand. "That's because of you." She blushed, a rare moment of vulnerability breaking through her usual composure. "I didn't do anything special." "You did everything," I said, pulling her closer. "You reminded me what it feels like to be seen. To be loved for who I am." Her eyes shimmered with tears, and she laughed softly. "Well, you make it easy." The dramatic ending I once imagined for my story, one filled with anger and revenge, never came. Instead, it ended with quiet resolution, with the understanding that life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. Sophie's betrayal had broken me, yes, but it also pushed me toward a life I never would have found otherwise. As I stood on the porch one evening, watching the sun set with Olivia by my side, I realized something: endings are rarely what we expect. Sometimes, they're just the beginning of something new. And this time, I was ready for it.